welcome to another episode of Talking Sunday Readings. I'm Father Chuck Carter, joined by Pastor Richard Stadler and by Ann Carter, and we're talking the readings for the fourth Sunday in Lent. And today we'll talk Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 through 21, Ephesians 5, verses 8 through 14, and the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. So we'll start first here in Exodus 16.
A reading from Exodus. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him." "Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said. "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we?" "You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" When Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in a cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, 'At twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God.'" That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, "No one is to keep any of it until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away.
And this is the Israelites. They've made it out of bondage in Egypt. They've made it past the Red Sea. Now they're out in the wilderness, and they're hungry. They have no food, and they make this complaint: "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Oh God, you brought us through all of this stuff just to kill us out here in the desert. I can't.
Talk about glorifying the past, huh? I mean, I can't believe the slaves in Egypt were eating to their full and sitting in leisure like that. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's we can poke a little bit of fun, but to your point from last week, when you're in the desert, it probably gives you a very different perspective on what you need. And if indeed, as they say, they were without food, then it might bring them into a place of desperation. And so they register this complaint, and Moses and Aaron hear it. And then God comes and speaks with Moses, and he tells them that I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them whether or not they will follow my instruction. So it's a curious kind of, it's a testing. It's the people of Israel getting to know who God is and learning to obey the voice of God. And so the manna comes, and the quails, they come to give meat for the people. But there's an instruction that Moses gives them, that when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and you're filled with the bread, you'll take enough, but you won't take any more for yourselves. You'll have enough to satisfy your hunger, but no more. And everyone will have enough. And indeed, that's what happens, that they have their fill of bread, but those who take too much, the bread turns to moldy, worm-ridden, foul stuff. And those who didn't think they took enough, well, they're still well fed, it says. So it's kind of this interesting, as I've heard it said, it's gospel math, if you will. It's might not make sense, but it makes sense. It works. But there are a couple of things here about this, that the giving of the bread, the giving of the meat, says that it's not just simply so that they can eat and be filled. It's so that then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. That this is God showing forth his glory to his people, that he has redeemed and brought from bondage in Egypt. And it's not something for their own satisfaction, rather it is something that deepens the relationship that the people of Israel have with their God as they are out in the wilderness. That's the real purpose. It's not simply to satisfy their hunger, it is rather to strengthen and heighten their awareness of who God is and how God interacts with them. So
God didn't do it because they complained, and he hadn't a thought in his mind about that they were going to need food. It's not like they had reminded him of it, and it's not like they went out and sowed seeds and grew their own crops, and it's not like they went out and conquered a city and took all the food from them. They were absolutely alone and desperate, and they were not alone, and they had everything.
right.
But he still tested them because he said, don't leave any food over left till morning. And some of the people tried to hedge their bets. And I don't know if God will deliver tomorrow morning with the same stuff. So they kept it, and Moses was furious.
Yeah.
And he also, early in this story, just like last week's story from Exodus, says, when you complain against Aaron and me and blame us for your lack of food, and so you're really blaming God.
Yeah.
And you're testing God. And the episode we looked at last week comes after this episode, and you would have thought they would have learned from this, because this manna occurs every single morning for 40 years, the entire wilderness wandering. It doesn't stop until they reach the promised land. And I don't know if the quail meat stayed every night appearing to them too, but there seems to be some indication that also was provided for them the whole 40 years. And so how thankless can a people be? Well, if we look at ourselves, don't we fall into the same traps?
Absolutely.
You know, that we can have all these blessings that God gives us, and we look at what we don't have rather than what we do have. And even the term they gave for this, manna, is Hebrew. I mean, it's a question. It means, what is it? And so if we were going to find, and the people then call it the question, they call it manna, we're told in the text. And I mean, today we call it whatchamacallit. You know, give me some more of that whatchamacallit, you know.
Yeah.
But every morning it was they're waiting for them. And the mothers must have had a nightmare trying to figure out different ways to fix it so that it would be different. Here's muffins, here's pancakes. I mean, here's whatever they had to do to make it interesting
There's
for the
some
children.
matzah,
Yeah. Okay.
Just eat your manna and be quiet.
Yeah.
Well, that takes us to the epistle lesson in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 8 to 14. And
A reading from Ephesians. Once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what such people do secretly. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, for everything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, Sleeper, awake, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.
And here, maybe the theme that would connect all three of these readings people can look for is the face of darkness. We saw the face of darkness in the Old Testament lesson was expressed by grumbling and thanklessness and so forth. And here, Paul says, do not participate in the works of darkness, evil. In fact, don't even, what you should do is rebuke them and expose them. And then don't fall into spiritual slumber and wake from that and let Christ shine on you and through you, And so here he's picking up on what we also hear in the Dead Sea Scrolls is a contrast between the sons of light and the sons of darkness.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was a popular dichotomy that was in the Jewish world of Jesus' day. And Paul is picking up on that too and just saying, you are now light in the Lord. He doesn't say you're going to become light. You are light, and let your light shine. But that also means letting your light shine into darkness and expose it for what it is. And that's not something that's very comfortable for us Christians, is to constantly be exposing darkness. We'd rather just kind of turn our head from it and ignore it, rather because we know it's going to give us trouble. That's going to bring conflict into our lives.
Yeah.
But it starts with Christ, not with us. And so he's the one. We're like moons. We just reflect the light that comes from the sun. And so we have to let him shine. Anything else in this text that people should look for? I guess the one parting shot that occurred to me was, when you talk about sons of light and sons of darkness, the truth is we are all both light and darkness, because we're sinner saints. And that's why there's a certain amount of darkness in me that I've got to let the light side of me shine into and have an effect on, a positive effect on, to diminish it. And that's a constant struggle. And I can see some people who are struggling with some of their darker side moments and wondering, will I ever get control of this? Will I ever be able to overcome it? And Paul is saying, let Christ be the focus and let him be at the center of your life, and he will keep shining, into those dark corners and dispelling them. Yeah. So there's hope there. Yeah. But now that takes us to the gospel.
The Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man, blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the light, I am the light of the world. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, Is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some were saying, It is he. Others were saying, No, but it is someone like him. He kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, Then how were your eyes opened? He answered, The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others said, How can a man who is a sinner perform such sights? And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened. He said, He is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, He is of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been born blind, and they said to him, Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him, saying, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us? And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this, and said to him, Surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains.
Ephesians ends 5:14 that Christ will shine on you. And in John, he says, I am the light of the world. I thought it was a good tie-in, obviously, between the two. The story from John is a very long story, and it's a fascinating one because there's so many parts to it. But Jesus meets a man. He saw a man. He was blind from birth, and they have this discussion. The disciples and Jesus have a discussion. Who sinned? Was it the man or was it his parents? And Jesus said, neither one. That's not how this works. But because he's here, because he's blind, his life is going to be blessed by God, and God is going to use him. As he used the manna to strengthen his people in the Old Testament, he uses certain things to create a stronger group of people to follow him. So Jesus talks to him, and he makes this mud with saliva, puts it on the man's eyes, tells him to go wash. The man washes, he can see. Glory be. And then people say, well, how did this happen? So they report him to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees get involved, and then they start questioning because this happened on the Sabbath. So they bring the guy's parents in. And because first there's the question, well, is this the guy that we've seen every day who's blind? Yes, it is. Well, was he really blind? Well, his parents say yes. Well, then they say, well, who did this? And then the parents have to say, well, ask him. He's an adult.
Right.
It's all of this fearful, I don't know what to say because I don't want to get put out of the synagogue, so I'm not going to. Finally, Jesus comes back. And he says, what do you want to believe? And he says, yes, I do. And he said, well, I'm the one. And so then surely he says, I believe, and Jesus says in verse 39, I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. It's a contradiction. It's a turning things upside down. Those people who are in leadership who thought they had all the answers, Jesus says, you don't. You have to let my light shine in so that you can know the truth. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating thing. Just a couple more points and then I'll open it up. Verse 24. The Pharisees say to the man, give glory to God. And later, he does. Mm-hmm. He goes out and he gives glory to God. He says to them, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Mm-hmm. So what they didn't expect that his answer was fulfilling what they told him to do.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I find intriguing in this is that it's very contemporary at the very beginning of the story, when the disciples, who must have been influenced by their culture, give evidence of the fact that there were Jewish traditions that said, if a child is born with a disabling condition, it was because of some sin that the parents committed. And they actually had a one-for-one identification. Here's the sin that the parents commit that causes blindness. Here's the sin that causes this, and so forth. And so the disciples are giving evidence that they've been influenced by that cultural understanding. And Jesus dismisses it, and he dismantles it. And I think today there are a number of parents who do have a child who's born with a congenital condition, a disease or a limitation, and they wonder what they did, to deserve this and so on. And Jesus says, don't. This child, though limited, is still a gift from God. Treat it like a gift. Receive it as a gift. What I find Ken Bailey saying in his commentary on this story, very intriguing that I never thought about. If this guy had been blind from birth, that means the only thing he could do was be a beggar. He was a professional beggar. And now that he's got his vision back, suddenly his career is shot. Because nobody's going to give money to a guy who's visible. And when we went to India, we saw all kinds of kids with unbelievable diseased eyes, kids who are on little platforms with wheels on it, who had no legs and so on. And they were all over the streets begging. And I would guess that in the ancient world that was the case too. Yeah. But what a traumatic moment his healing was. Complicating moment for this guy. Because now I got to figure out how I'm going to take care of myself. Because people aren't going to be able to, they're not going to give me money anymore. And so that's a fascinating consequence of his healing that I had never even thought about.
Everything in his world changed.
It's gonna, especially now they can see everything, and he can. You remember how you listen to a radio voice, and then you suddenly see the person at the state fair, and you say, "Boy, he doesn't look at all like his voice sounds," you know. And I imagine that's what was going to be his experience too. That as he started seeing these people who match the voices that he's heard all the time when he was begging, Yeah.
So. I thought that was a question the Pharisees said. Well, who did this? And he said, well, I don't know. I didn't see him. I was blind then. I can't identify him to you. He comes close and talks to me. Yes,
Well, and that's an interesting question that this text raises geographically. If they were at Temple Mount and he had to make his way blind all the way down to the pool of Siloam, that would have been a really tough thing. It would have required somebody helping him.
Yeah.
However, they've now uncovered archaeologically in Jerusalem, under all the Arab homes in the city of David, the Pilgrim Highway. And so there was this broad highway with steps on it. And so it wouldn't have been quite as complicated as I used to picture it, with all these winding little roads to get down to the pool of
Would have been
Siloam.
a
It
straight
would have been
shot.
a straight shot.
Yeah.
And someone could have given him an arm and said, let's go. I'll get you down there so you can wash this mud off your eyes. Yeah. So it's just fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
There's this interesting moment too when he's trying to explain to the Pharisees what happened, and he's trying to make this point that, well, look, I don't know how he did it, but I know from what I've learned that a man who could do something like this is obviously very special and very extraordinary, and if this man were not from God, he couldn't have done what he did to me. And then these Pharisees, they become indignant and they say, you're born entirely in sins, and we know it because you were born blind, and you dare to teach us, you know. And then they drive him out. It's the Pharisees are made even blinder.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's proper grammar, but they become even more blind by not only their refusal to accept Jesus, but then when they see what Jesus does, they remain obstinate. They continue in their obstinacy, and then that's when we have Jesus returning to the scene, and then adding kind of a condemnation upon them that if you were blind, you would not have sinned, but now that you say we see, your sin remains. That is, they're not making things better for themselves. They're just kind of piling it on, and which is too bad, but.
Well, and their anger is aroused even more fiercely because he takes this mud, makes mud on the Sabbath. And their oral Torah says you can't do work. And here's the specifics about what you can and can't do. And that was apparently one of the things in their list of forbidden things. And Jesus says, I don't follow your oral Torah. I don't follow your traditions. And there's nothing in the scriptures that say that I can't do this and heal this man. You know, and so there's a polemic going on here, and Jesus is kind of poking them in the eye, excuse me, because they are blind, and he's just saying you're blinder than what you even recognize. Yeah.
Well, I think that does us our discussion for today. Thank you for joining us on Talkin' Sunday Readings. We hope that you will come back again next week. Thank you, as always, to Tim Carter, our narrator, our director, our editor. I hope you have a good week. We'll see you next time.